When I was 32, I went on a solo camping trip in the woods nearby with my loyal companion, Max, a golden retriever. It was April, and I had taken all necessary precautions since the nights could get quite chilly even though the daytime weather was warm. I packed my portable campfire equipment, a wood chopping axe, and a lighter, all set for a fishing adventure by the lake. Naturally, I brought a tent, a sleeping bag, and fishing gear. My food supplies were adequate for the 2 days I planned to spend there to enjoy any fish I caught. I parked my car and hiked a mile through the forest to get to the lake. Max accompanied me on our fishing excursion, and I set up our cozy campsite by the lakeside. I decided to release some smaller fish I caught since they weren't worth cooking. While we were fishing, Max's tail ceased wagging, and he appeared fixated on something in the nearby trees, possibly the presence of small animals. Although Max is well trained and stays within boundaries, I opted not to use a leash. After nearly an hour of fishing, we strolled around the lake. On the opposite side of the lake, I noticed what seemed to be a pair of individuals wandering into the woods. They were too distant to discern clearly, but they appeared human and were uncomfortably close to my campsite. Wary of potential theft, I urged Max to return to the campsite. To my surprise, my tent was left open when we returned. Despite the absence of valuables aside from fishing gear and the campfire equipment, everything appeared to be present. Nonetheless, the sight of those individuals near my campsite unnerved me. As a precaution, I relocated my campsite further up the lake over the next hour. I then began chopping wood for a campfire and prepared dinner, heating some chili. Max suddenly began barking at something in the forest while I sat by the fire, writing in my journal. With the darkness having set in, I could only see what was illuminated by the fire. Slightly uneasy, I peered into the shadows but eventually brought Max inside the tent and extinguished the flames to avoid drawing attention to our location. I crawled into my sleeping bag and began reading a book with my reading lamp nearby. Max continued to prick his ears, alert to sounds I couldn't hear, and scanned the tent's walls. I wondered what was causing his agitation. He eventually snarled, his attention seemingly fixed on something outside, possibly a bear, deer, or person. The thought of an unknown person lurking in the darkness troubled me more than the possibility of encountering a bear. After some time, Max calmed down, and I turned off my lantern, hoping for a peaceful night's rest. A few hours later, Max's growling and barking awakened me. I hushed him, straining my ears to listen. I heard someone whistling, the kind used to get a dog's attention. Max reacted with renewed snarling, and I was terrified that someone was at our campsite in the pitch-black darkness. Instead of whistling, the person outside the tent began making clicking sounds. Their footsteps drew closer to the tent and then stopped abruptly just outside. I managed to quiet Max, who was howling hysterically, without saying a word. In the absence of the crackling campfire, the night was eerily silent. Max growled again and turned his head towards the tent's zipper. There was a pause before the person outside the tent whistled again. Max erupted in agitation again, prompting me to bluff. "You better leave. I'm armed." However, my voice betrayed my fear and sounded more terrified than commanding. The footsteps retreated slowly and eventually faded away, or perhaps they stopped short of the tent, as Max intermittently growled for nearly an hour afterwards. I was too frightened to venture outside and pack up in the dark, but I couldn't sleep. My phone had no signal in the wilderness, rendering me unable to contact friends or family. Then, I heard a woman's distant scream, echoing for what seemed like miles. It sounded like a distressed woman, and it was the last straw. I put on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, took Max, and left. I sprinted back to my vehicle, following the same path I had taken initially. My phone still had no signal, so I spent the night in my truck. The following day, Max and I returned to the campsite. I hastily packed up my belongings and disassembled the tent without checking if anything needed to be added or misplaced. I just wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Within 30 minutes, I was on my way out. As soon as I had cell reception, I called the non-emergency police number I found online to report the woman's scream and the suspicious individuals at my campsite the previous night. I never returned to that campsite and remained unsure of what had happened to my belongings or what had transpired in those woods.